Welcome, everybody. Welcome to the digitization of supply chains. This is our Digital Business Institute webinar for the month of February. I'm Pete Howard from the Digital Business Institute here at Question School of Business. Welcome. Pleased to be joined today by Professor Nitin Joglekar, Associate Professor, Operations and Technology Management. Professor Joglekar's interests span digital product management thinking, DPMT, deployment of analytics, machine learning techniques, and digitization and public policy issues in local and global supply chains. Currently, obviously big issues are post-COVID supply chain management. So today, Professor Joglekar will discuss the digitization of the backbone of our economy, supply chains. Welcome, Professor.
Thank you, Peter, and welcome to all our participants. I'm delighted to be here. And I just wanted to begin by acknowledging that I've been very fortunate for the last 5 years or so in working with some leading scholars. I've listed some of them out here, and with some leading companies and the World Economic Forum. And that work has resulted in some managerial publications and research publications. The intent today, in some sense, is not to touch on any one of them, but to sort of talk about broader trends. And the big broader trend here that I just want you to kind of think about is this notion that supply chains are no more some back office stuff from way back, especially in the last 3 years. Supply chains are sort of in minds of top corporate leaders, national leaders, and the general public. My mother-in-law, her wisdom suddenly was asking me about supply chain disruptions, and that is not uncommon. So essentially, just like Peter said, what has happened today is that supply chains have become much more complex, much more critical, visible. There are issues just like COVID, just like Ukraine, that is forcing us to think about supply chains more broadly. And my intent then is to talk about the trends, the prospects, but then leave time for a dialogue, for questions and answers. And I know that there are students here, some are undergraduates, some are online MBA folks with many years of experience, and there are other folks, fellow scholars and so on. So I'd love to make this a much more engaging dialogue after I've shared some initial thoughts. So with that, Peter.
Great, thank you. And to that point, if you have questions, please enter them into the Q&A box, and we'll address them as we go and towards the end. So then to start, I love the quote on your bio page, by the way. And you said, to quote you, digital technology skills give our students more career flexibility and mobility across industries. Our classes also teach different ways of looking at the world, teaching students how to learn and adapt. Seems so relevant today, right? Can you expand on that?
Delighted to. So first of all, I'm so thrilled to work with these students. And there's two things that I just want to sort of point, and you might say I'm saying the obvious. One is this flexibility that is offered to us through digitization. And I call that a horizontal skill set. And I want to talk about this horizontal, which means it carries from industry to industry very easily, quite a bit in today's talk as it relates to supply chain. And what that horizontal skill set in supply chain does is that allows you to learn in one place, but then, the world changes and you apply it to another place in a different industry or in the same industry, but a different job. So that's one richness of this digital skill set that we're going to talk about. And the second thing is this notion that just because you learned it one way doesn't mean that you should be applying it exactly for that kind of an application in a different industry. You really have an opportunity to reframe the problem. So I teach this wonderful online MBA program. Some of you are here. And in one of our mods, we ask people to reframe problems. And an example of a problem that we've asked students to reframe is what are the needs of digital nomads? Think about it. So I'm a supply chain guy, right? So I'm going to ask you, what are the supply chain needs for digital nomads as opposed to good old folks who live in a city? It's an opportunity both for supply chain providers and for innovators. And we hope that our students sort of take that kind of a position, horizontal skill sets, flexibility and adaptation to open up new avenues for themselves.
Great introduction and great framework for our students. So starting with digital supply chain, if I could just prompt you with a broad question, can you define for the audience, what do you mean by digital supply chain?
Sure, Peter. So I'm going to hit return, and this is a very simple-minded picture of a supply chain. The stuff comes in from left-hand side, inbound, goes into a company, the company makes it better, and it goes outbound, so distributors and so on. That's what a supply chain, as we all know, looks like. And what's going on is that digitalization through technologies such as Industry 4.0 or AI allow us to track things wonderfully up and down, but more than that, it allows us then to optimize things and to deliver a performance that's very much best in class. And that's kind of the notion, central notion behind digitalization of supply chains. And here are some pictures that we've drawn. And we have 10 scenarios, just in case you cannot see the entire slide, that tells you there's many places that you can go and actually do projects. For example, item 1 is you could actually set up collaborative e-sourcing or procurement, and there are platforms these days, just not Amazon, but many others. Or you could go and set up something on digital quality for a healthcare supply chain. So through this thing, one last point I want to make is it's not as though in supply chain land, you could just call Amazon and say, give me all those 10 things. No, there are lots of trends, lots of technologies. And there's a claim these days that if you sort of did this right, you could reduce your cost up to 50%, and you could gain a substantial amount in revenues. And then the question is, why isn't everybody doing it? And the answer is there are challenges, and hopefully we'll get to some of them. But I do want to point out that within this setting, Gartner this year actually said that supply chain digital technologies were the fastest growing market segment in the data that they capture. So I hope I've sort of given you a sense of what we're doing here, where it is going to help you in terms of revenues or costs, and that there really is growth here.
Well, that's great. See, you mentioned the challenges. Can you expand on some of the common challenges for companies and industry?
Yeah, so sure. Anytime we throw in a number like 50%, 20%, the obvious question is, well, why isn't everybody doing it? And the answer is that there is issues. So I'm trying to get to the next slide, which doesn't want to come on easily. So let me try this again. Can you see the slide, Peter?
Yes.
All right. So there's lots of technologies. I'll just take one, AR, VR, used for automating training for folks so they can practice on digital and then actually go and physically solve a problem in a factory or in a supply chain. And so the challenges are that, yeah, you invest in this technology, it's technology plus training, which means you're investing in people, which is not cheap. And yeah, there are incremental productivity gains, but they may not be enough, and they may not, you just may be automating what you're doing without perhaps innovating and changing the way that these things need to be done. That's one challenge. And the second challenge is much more debated in real companies, and I'll give you some examples in a few minutes. But there are constraints. Anytime somebody wants to bring in new technology, they ask for money, and we all know that the capital is limited. And equally important, the right people are not available, and I'm going to talk about that quite a bit. So limited capital and talent. But this is just not capital and talent. There's a third issue, which is that suddenly supply chains have much broader framing. So now, while you're sort of bringing in these technologies, you have to think about ESG challenges, design and equity issues, and think about disasters or disruptions which are going to come. And if your supply chain is very hardwired, then it makes it worse. So you need to design things in which are very resilient to things like Brexit, COVID, post-COVID Ukraine changes. I mean, this list goes on and on. So as we are sort of thinking about these technologies, it's not about just getting one more robot. It's about investment levels, capital, talent, productivity, and resilience. That makes this much more complex. I'm going to take a minute to say how some companies have addressed these challenges. This work has come from this report that we did for the World Economic Forum. The pictures are on the left-hand side. Reports are publicly available. And these are some of the top companies in the world. And I want to sort of say this, that this is rare. McKinsey tells us that only about 10 to 15% of the companies who need, of 100% companies that need to do this have actually tried this. And we've talked to some of the better companies here. So there's three stages or three types of these solutions. One of them I will want to call as point solution. So what's a simple example of a point solution? So a simple example of a point solution, and these are the digital transformations we see most often. It's this notion, okay, you have a production line for a drug, and you put in a bunch of sensors, and you put in the hook of those sensors with an AI tool, and you optimize the flow of the material through the pipeline so that you get the least amount of defects and the highest amount of quality. And the ROI can be sort of shown and can be done in a year or two. The learning opportunity for point solutions is that they are not very standardized. So if you try to do it in one place, can you sort of scale this elsewhere? That's the open question that managers should think about. And the second issue is that this requires digital skill. Again, skills and talent. It's the real bottleneck. So that's one notion of point solutions. The second notion is a little bit broader. The second notion is, again, that over time, this will increase your productivity dramatically, is this notion of digital infrastructure for supply chains. This is a little bit different from infrastructure at companies like HubSpot, which are purely digital play companies. So now we're sort of doing this in a supply chain land. And what this means is that you need to hook up physical and digital together. And it requires you to have new kind of measurements. So an example would be, so we worked with Unilever, and Unilever has literally a control tower that looks like a NASA control tower for a supply chain. And it's getting feed from Merck's. And Merck sort of said, don't worry about the inbound and outbound data. We manage shipping. We'll give you that data. And Unilever is bringing in its inside data, and the whole thing is getting into a control tower. Think about that. And then you're making sort of decisions in real time. So this kind of infrastructure, it's complex. It requires multiple years of development. And more importantly, it requires extensive collaboration with external stakeholders along the value chain. And this requires upfront investments. And it requires new way of sort of measuring your online performance. So that's the second box. And the third box is, of course, the idea is just not to have this infrastructure. Hopefully, this infrastructure allows you to perhaps change your business model system-wide, recognize revenues that you never had recognized before. So Merck itself has created new lines of business. They are sort of selling zero carbon footprint deliveries in the logistic business through this kind of a capability. So they're observing where things are going within their company, within their ships, and then at Unilever, but then they're sort of guaranteeing everybody that if you pay them a little extra, they will give you sort of the zero carbon footprint shipment if you care. So definition of the right matrix for this business model is important. It's not just automating things, and that is the scalable. Again, the entire business for Merck go this way, not clear. So these three very different ways of addressing challenges. And the last point I will make is this is just not a bunch of computer scientists and engineers. This is a management challenge because there's investment issues, there's skills issues, there's trade-offs, and that you just don't run any one of these things, that you run these three kinds of solutions, and they run at different speeds. And it's your job, and they're different stakeholders. So it's your job to sync up different speeds and different stakeholders. So we've done some deep dive studies on this just to understand where these things have worked, and we are learning from it.
Great. So given that, I guess the past few minutes have been great set up and foundation on digital supply chain, Some of your research has been around micro foundations of digital supply chain transformation projects. Talk about skill building, hiring, and digital business model implications. So would you like to pivot into micro foundations?
Sure. So I want to sort of begin by pointing out that micro foundations is not my idea. It's been around. What's just simple street speak? What's micro foundation? It's sort of what individuals do. This is the work that you actually do, and it's affected by your biases and behavioral choices. But what individuals do, and when it happens in a company, now it sort of happens at the team level. So Professor Tees, for example, has said that micro foundations should be thought in terms of what cross-functional teams do, or product development teams do, or quality control teams do to create dynamic capabilities. That is the idea. And what we did was we went to some of the companies that we work with, and we sort of said to them, all right, why don't you share with us a project that's a point solution, a project that's an infrastructure project, and a project that is a business transformation project. And let's figure out what it is that your people do. We observed them and interviewed them, and we put them into a data structure, which I will show you. Here is a summary chart. So it's a takeaway. It's a very busy chart. So I just want you to think about not the data inside, which will actually come from these companies, but look at the boxes. So there's 3 kinds of projects, and then there's 3 stages of work. One is sensing, trying to figure out what should be done, and just see if there's merit. And there's green lighting, sometimes it's called seizing. And once you decide to seize it, then you decide to actually then scale it. So what we did was we tried, we had this entire data set is about hundreds of different skills. We mapped them and prioritized them based on the input in the data structure. And these are the top skills. I'm not asking you to read all of them. I'm just going to highlight a few. So let's think about the first one. So the first one is for point solutions and sensing, which is trying to figure out if this project is worth doing. The key skill that came up was internal analysis of operations. So operations analysis. That is what you do as a starting point to sense if this project is worth doing. That was the first one. Top down was number 2 here. For green lighting, like an infrastructure project, the key skill that came up with was how do you find alignment and fit with multiple projects? Because it's an infrastructure, many projects are going to use it. And how do you sort of figure out the right matrix or right figures of merit so that you can align with multiple needs? That was the key skill. And for reconfiguring, and this is a surprise for me, but not in hindsight, the idea was before you scale, these digital folks said, now, first thing was to start small, figure out an agile project, show me some early wins. Apply design thinking here. Mind you, these are actual data. I didn't write them up. They came through a fair bit of analysis. And what I want to sort of say to you is that when I look at this chart from a distance, to me, these are horizontal technologies. This is horizontal know-how because you can use them in a company like Moderna. You can use them in a bank. You could, so it's really transferable across. So I made that point that these skill sets are transferable. And one of the key things that I want to sort of communicate out of this is that think about the transferable skills first. They are very important, and those are exactly the kind of skills that you should be learning in a college setting, is my point. And I know there's some industrial partners here, and we'll talk about how they manage it separately, but I just wanted to communicate. So this notion is that it's about these skills. And the biggest issue in supply chains right now is that the right digital talent is short supply everywhere. I was in Detroit at this Institute for Advanced Manufacturing. There were a number of CEOs in the room. We all did group discussions, and many groups sort of came up with, all right, what's the single largest issue? Nobody sort of said, oh, we need more blockchains. They all know where to get blockchain know-how. It was always hard to find the right people. And why is that? And as a teacher, I mean, it hardens my heartens me, but it also bothers me. So one issue is that when it comes to manufacturing or supply chain work, there's a lot of hardworking folks who are very good at what they do in their conventional jobs, but they don't have the right digital training. So it's the wrong mix of skill sets. And the second issue is that some of the younger folks don't want to sort of go and apply this in a manufacturing setting. Why don't I go and work in a bank? Why do I have to go and work sort of in Moderna's plant, which is making important vaccines, but they think, oh, it's not a transferable skill. I work for a bank, then I can go to the next bank. The reality is, though, that the digital layer, even at manufacturing companies, are horizontal skills, and they can be transferable. There are solutions to these problems. They're happening. So, for example, we work with Schneider Electric quite a bit. And what they've sort of done is they've created an entire inventory of skills which are needed at the digital level. So companies are trying to manage this. Others have sort of figured out, hey, we can't do this ourselves, so we'll make this a service. So we can rent that service from somebody. Or if we have the skills and excess capacity, then we will rent it out to others. So this is digital transformation as a service capability that is being offered. And of course, when the market needs are so great, startups happen everywhere. Here are two. So Tulip is a Boston startup. I think very highly of them. They are in sort of 3D printing and other kinds of areas, and they will sort of offer up and do things for you. Site Machine is a West Coast startup, another really wonderful startup, largely focused on supply chain and manufacturing. That will take care of data for you if you don't have the right skill set. So essentially, what I'll sort of say to you, this talent problem, the horizontal skill problem is real. There are people who are trying to address it, but there also is an opportunity here.
Fascinating. So what's next?
Next, I hope some of our participants shed some light on it. But from my perspective, there are two major themes. One theme is for our students. I really want to say to our students, please acquire these horizontal skills in digital transformation of supply chains. For example, figure out how to set up data integration across supply chain platforms, just not a single platform, and that will make you valuable. So figure out how to hook up Amazon with Coupa, or how to hook up Workday with a Google platform or whatever, from a supply chain sense, and then bring in analytics tool. And as I've sort of said earlier on, that the decisions are just not black and white ROI kind of decisions. The decisions have multi-criteria. It's ROI plus ESG consideration. Plus, it has this network effects that you've been studying somewhere else. So the idea is to bring them together to figure out where the shortages are going to be. That's the skill set that's missing. And I hope that you take courses, not any one, but multiple courses to sort of develop that skill set. And the second point there is that just horizontal skill set sometimes is not enough. So if you're going to work on vaccines, all right, then try to do an action project, or try to get an internship to apply these skills in a certain vertical, and that becomes a plus. So that's the message for sort of the many students in the room. And there's a second message, which is for research partners. So this is Peter and me and others working together. And this notion is, just because we have learned so much from these companies and the World Economic Forum doesn't mean we stop. The world has new technologies. Everybody and their mother, I'm sure, has pretty much now heard of or sometimes played with ChatGPT, other things, and so on. The point being that the way we think about these problems needs to evolve. We just launched a project on supply chain benchmarking, digital supply chain benchmarking using AI for scenario planning and figuring out triggers for disruptions, that sort of thing. So that's kind of where we want to take this educational side and research side. And of course, there's a lot many open questions, then I probably have time here. So what I want to do instead is to kind of turn this over to Peter and see if we can get into a learning mode of conversation with our audience.
Let's do it. And before though, I have to say though, you mentioned, and I'll reinforce it, that the Digital Business Institute, we're partnering on this digital research coming up, and couldn't be more excited, right? Because in my own experience, having worked in the e-commerce industry, I would encourage everyone to think broadly, as Nitin, as you have very eloquently described today, that supply chain is the core of every business, right? And digital supply chain especially. So in e-commerce businesses, you can market, you can drive traffic to your website, you can, sell product, but it has to get to the supply chain to be delivered, right, to the customer, and they have to be satisfied, and it has to be timely and accurate. So it's so intertwined, in understanding it, even if you're going into e-commerce or marketing or even finance, what have you, is so critical. So very well described. Well said, sir.
Thank you. We're excited about this opportunity. And this is also an opportunity for us to get your questions and also get your concerns. I'm sure you guys are kind of thinking about this.
Yes,
Peter,
please ask questions. We have one so far from Tiago. Thank you, Professor, for the insights. In supply chain, there is usually significant information asymmetry among the key players. For example, lead times are constantly changing, and there are low visibility across the next levels of the value chain. How do you see the supply chain information asymmetry evolving in the near future?
So first of all, Diego, I'm so proud that you're asking this question. I'm presuming you're a student, and so I want to say, you're an industry partner. That's even very impressive, and I would say it's very real. So a lot of digital work, for example, writing contracts, pricing them, and so on, will come down to who has the information, is willing to take the risks and hedge them, or what have you, through these contracts, or what we are signing up for. And then once the contracts are signed, how is the work progressing? Of course, if you don't have full visibility, people will keep on telling you, yeah, our project is 90% done, and it's 90% done forever. Of course, and you have no visibility and control. So it's a real problem. It's been addressed as a problem by a number of folks. And what I would say is a portion of the infrastructure story. So I told you the story about Merck's and Unilever have signed this agreement, and they said they were to create this control tower. The old-fashioned way would have been Merck says, I will let you know when it's ready, and then we'll price it. Instead of that, Merck has gone to what's called a 4PL. This is the fourth level logistic arrangement, where Merck said, you're not paying me for just delivery, you're paying me for the entire service. So logistics as a service. So you're going to pay me for a successful service. Let's not worry about who's providing the service. It could be Merck, or it could be a competitor from Merck. And so this kind of a 4PL supply chain logistic arrangement driven by control towers and full digital visibility is a new business model for Merck. It's only possible because they're beating down on the good old information asymmetry problem and creating a model that a customer like Unilever in this case is signing on to, because both Merck and Unilever went this way. Because Merck is assuring Unilever that they will get the lowest price logistic provider. They might even exclude themselves if that's the right condition, because they are really giving them a complete solution. So, wonderful question. It's an area I hope that you study, and it'll, especially with different infrastructure platforms coming around, there's a lot of upside and possibility in digitalization within this area.
Thank you. We have a couple more from Sunil Uniraw. He says, thank you for hosting the seminar. When you mentioned Coupa and Amazon, what use case scenarios have you already seen deployed? Is there a recommendation for implementation?
So there's actually a fair bit of work in this area. So the use case could be the following. So imagine that you're doing e-procurement, and a portion of your procurement is sort of coming through Amazon because it's sort of open-ended, the larger market and so on. And there's other portion of your uh, um, raw materials which are specialized, like sensors and so on, that Amazon doesn't sell, and those sensors or integration of those sensors is being auctioned through the e-procurement. Now, you couldn't simply say, I'll only use Amazon as my procurement system, and you couldn't say, I will only use Coupa as my procurement system. You need a portion of both, and you also need data sharing across this. So that's the use case. Will Coupa actually come and put together sort of an interface into Amazon? They could, but that could be expensive. Or you might decide, and that's the use case that I've seen, that a certain company decided that they were going to write their own server wrapper for parsing the data across these two platforms so that they could use it for their negotiations for procurement. And that's just one use case. There are many others because, like I said, this is not like good old, HubSpot that just controls the entire portion of the market, or Amazon. That just the nature of the work requires us to have multiple specialized platforms, and then the challenge is how best to take advantage of it. And as we know, between Coupa and Amazon, they are not the only players. They also have competition. So I hope that I've given you enough to think about in terms of how to do this. Great questions, by the way. Thank you.
Excellent. From our colleague, Francois Charvet, thanks for covering this important, exciting topic. Focusing on the next steps, e.g. slide 7, for students or young professionals interested in a career in digital supply chains, what are some learning and education opportunities? And he continues to say, at first sight, one may think they are not as easily available or not very focused on supply chain versus, let's say, digital marketing, data engineering, or generic data science educational offerings. But he's curious if this is an area that you've had a chance to investigate. So the learning and education opportunities within.
Well, first of all, Francois, thank you for joining us. For the folks who are not know Francois is an expert in this area with a doctoral degree. He's worked at BCG in this area, and he runs our business analytics program. So he's really setting me up to give a very rich answer, and probably he knows a lot more about this than I do. But here's my view. So my view of the world is that people innovate no matter what. If there's not a single course that stitches everything together, people figure out and get their way around it, and they'll take two courses, one in the business analytics program, other one in the regular MBA program. Or they will come back to Peter and say, Peter, can we design a directed study within the institute so that we learn? The point is that this knowledge is in, courses are sometimes siloed. Marketing is a silo. Supply chain analytics is a silo. The point is, if you are focused on learning, you take a course here and a course there, and then maybe do a little bit of a project here and a little bit of a project there, and then you marry them and you go, okay, this is how these things come together. That's one way today for our current students to get around this. Over time, of course, what happens is people like you and we observe this, and we simply go, why don't we stitch together and create a new course, which is what we do. Sometimes that takes a couple of years. But that's the way to think about it. I have to tell you this, in the last 6 months from your business analytics program, I can document 6 different emails that I got looking for a project. In each case, I couldn't give them the project, but actually I wrote to them. The point is, students are reaching out because they know that many of the integration opportunities lie at the interface of, okay, I learned machine learning here and I know how to do the algorithm, but how do I actually use it for a real supply chain data set? And while I'm doing this, it's just not a supply chain solution. There's also a pricing issue and so on. So a single project may not cut it, but it's this notion that the opportunity for horizontal learning lies at the integration level. And we have enterprising students who can think about that. Craft it. Sometimes integration is challenging. That's an old story, right? Interoperability integration. It is just that now it's much more omnipresent, so to speak. And how can we help our students craft those kinds of projects?
Great answer. Thank you. Last question we have right now, unless others come in, is, oh, just had another one. So anyway, the question is, are there any must-know technology standards or protocols which are key to understand as part of supply chain digitization?
So I would say it's easier for me to answer that in chunks. Supply chain digitization is as big as a big elephant, right? So there's no must know for every part of this elephant. Remember my picture with 10 different frames? So let's take the one that we talked about. All right. So if you were to do e-procurement, pick either Coupa, which is up there in terms of market share, or pick Amazon, and sort of get yourself up that learning curve. And then also a second part of the story is if you're a healthcare / technology person, figure out in your internship or wherever else in the procurement job or something, what are certain companies using? Again, if you go and work in a smaller company, usually there's just one. So I'll take another example within this context of going back to say Salesforce. So Salesforce is giving you certain CRM needs on the marketing side, and then you have certain needs, but then you match that with the supply side from Coupa, and maybe you have some integration issues. And that kind of integration and those kind of solutions are available in the marketplace, but just understanding how to do it, where the sort of blind spots in this kind of integration is the learning opportunity.
Right. I love that answer because, so often in my career, people have asked when I was in consulting, what are the best solutions, right? And the answer is not obvious, right? It depends, right? It depends on their digital maturity, right? I mean, it depends on the needs, the requirements. And there's companies like Forrester, right, or Gartner that publish the quadrants of what are the best in class for certain use cases. And you need to do the research first, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And the other thing is, the good news here is that because there's so much interest, there's so much of such material available from the likes of Gartner. And I wouldn't, again, take what Gartner says lying down, but that's a starting point. Go kick it out. And then you're speaking the language and you go to an interview and it shows.
Wow, questions are coming in. So from Leon, I come from a project management background. Do I have the chance to find jobs in digitization for supply chains? Question mark. What are the job descriptions I should look out for?
Short answer, yes. Capital Y, capital E, and capital S. The three types of projects that I showed you, local point solutions, infrastructure, even business model implementation. In real supply chains, they don't happen by switching on, putting on a switch. They happen as discrete projects. So you have a project, you have a sensing phase to figure out the project is. Then there's we have sort of this green lighting and then actual project. Oftentimes these are agile projects. So go learn Scrum, go learn scaled agile. I'm huge on scaled agile. Their market share is more than 50%. Go learn them. Those are for horizontal skills, and then apply them. Go take an exam on scaled agile so that you are certified. And as you're taking the exam, if it's possible for you to get an internship, even if it's unpaid internship, go apply even for a point solution to be part of a team like that. That will get you a better interview or a better conversation in an interview. But believe me when I say this to you, digitalization, digital transformations are happening through projects, small and large. That is a foundational management skill set. You cannot work without that. Am I being very modest about this, Peter, or am I being?
No, I couldn't agree more. We share experiences about the importance of what people call the back end, right? But it's the core of any business to deliver product or move product around to satisfy customers. Jiwan, Thank you for offering valuable presentation today. So Jiwon has a master's degree in logistics. He's
Wow.
currently majoring in, epidemiology.
Wow.
So he has a lot of data analytics knowledge, and he plans to take classes related to clinical trials.
Wow.
But if an applicant like him applies for a company, would it be better to just go into a logistics company or to try to get into the supply chain management team of a pharma company like a Pfizer, I guess, or a Merck or something?
First of all, congratulations. You made some great choices. A logistics master's is non-trivial. Learning about epidemiology, clinical trials is non-trivial. I can assure you without naming company names. I'm working on a project on JIT clinical trial, just-in-time clinical trial. And where do I add value? Do I know much about clinical behavior? I don't. But I can add value personally as a logistics supply chain digitalization expert. Those are non-trivial design, experimental design, data analysis challenges. Just-in-time clinical trials are happening. Even some of the better companies, they're learning how to do them. I would go deeper. We'll always need them as my sort of view, no matter what. People just need to go deeper. So if you just sort of stayed on the one side, said, I know logistics and I'll have nothing to do with the healthcare piece of it, then you're not quite there yet. If you just know healthcare a little bit and then not enough about the lean operations and sort of the just-in-time setup for how to do these trials in the modern world, then that's not enough too. And so this is the intersection of these two kinds of know-how, which is very, very critical, Jiwon. And I do hope that you succeed. And equally important, I do hope that you tell us about it so that, I mean, for young people like you, I always say, first give me your brains and then down the road, we can ask you for your money. So if you have experiences like this or want to come up with experience like this, come to the Institute, talk to us. Peter and I are actually trying to get a number of healthcare companies into our projects. And some of them actually need to learn about just-in-time clinical trials. Yeah, that could be one of the 10 boxes for them.
Yeah, Jiwon, I would love to hear your story too as you get on your journey, because, again, I remember from working with large pharma companies, typically they're organized into, correct me if I'm wrong, but the 3 buckets: R&D, supply chain, or manufacturing, and commercial, kind of go to market. But you bridge the R&D, which is typically where the clinical trial management is, and the supply chain. And I would think that would be huge skill and value to the organization, whether it's Merck, Pfizer, GSK, whomever, because you would understand both sides of it. So congratulations again, as Nitin said. Well, we've come to the end of our questions. Thank you so much, audience. Thank you, everybody, for participating. And thank you, Professor Joglekar, for your insights and expertise. Any final words?
Well, so my final word have to be a plug for what your team is doing. I am one of many faculty, but it's a team that is looking at this big elephant from many perspectives. For sure, digital supply chain is one aspect of it. If somebody comes to us with digital supply chain problem, that doesn't mean that that's where the real problem is. Maybe we dig deeper, and the problem may be in a different area, say blockchains, for which we also have expertise in. I don't have to solve all those problems; somebody else can solve them. So, just want to put in a plug for our institute. Very excited about the kind of work that Peter is bringing under the same roof, and onwards and upwards.
Well, thank you very much, and great participation today. Thank you, everybody, for your engagement, and we'll give you a couple of minutes back. But with that, we'll end our session. Have a great day, everybody.